Greetings, everyone. Stan, your cartoonist pal, here again for another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, where I'm here to celebrate the fact that 2024 is the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons, which has meant so much to my life, like my fan life, my professional life, just my life in general. And I'm celebrating it with this show where I have guests on to talk about how their Dungeons and Dragons has played for them professionally and personally. And while I'm doing that, I do cartoon homages to a piece of classic Dungeons and Dragons art. We are going each episode. I pick a piece of art from the next year on in the sequence of the 50 years. And we are up to 1983, which is the year that a little module called I6 Ravenloft came out. And that is what I'm going to be doing a drawing of. I'm going to do an homage to the cover of that, the Clyde Caldwell art, which you'll see in a minute. And as it turns out, I'm lucky enough to be able to tell you that my guest today is the very author of that fine module, Mr. Tracy Hickman. So knowing that I have a lot of fun anytime I get to talk to him, I'm not going to delay anymore, and I'm going to get Tracy on the screen right here. Here we go. Oh, not there. There we go. Tracy's there.
There
Hello,
I am. That's
Tracy.
good. Thank you. Stan, my old friend, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, and it's very good to see you.
It's good
This
to be
whole
seen. Much better than viewed.
so first of all, thank you for coming on. Doing a show, this whole it gets me that I've got to do everything I have to do to put this on. I'm like, how does this ever get done? Right? But thankfully, I've got friends like you who are willing to come on and lend me a hand here.
Oh, always glad to do that. Always happy to help you out, Stan. You may not know it, of course, but I'm actually listening to something else in my headphones, not the program line. So,
I don't blame you.
yeah, man, this is real multitasking. I have to read your lips, and and
So for the point 0.5 people out there who have no idea, who is Tracy Hickman?
I've been asking that question myself for quite some time. I'm a grandfather,
Yes.
yes, and I'm a father. I'm a husband. I have to put that in.
Mm-hmm. These
I've
are the important.
also, yeah, these are the important things, and I am a generous person. I like to think.
Yes,
Um,
I would say so.
uh, um, I've also written some books. Let's see. I think that's somewhere around 64. Uh, you know, and with Margaret Weiss, a lot of those with Margaret Weiss, and we've been on the New York Times bestseller lists. I
Indeed.
think 14 times. I think is the number because I mean 13. I mean, please, you
It's
can't.
unlucky. No
Just a
one
bad
wants to be.
number.
I wouldn't want to be on the New York Times seller 13
No,
times.
what a waste of an effort. And I guess, and I got very much my start as a creative from when I was extremely young. Actually, my father's household was always a creative household. He was involved in early television
Hmm?
back in the and mid '50s and onward. He was he directed quite a bit. He also loved theater, and so he was in a lot of theater, and he directed a lot of theater, and he wrote plays. He painted um, landscapes in oils and acrylics, and so for us, creativity was always something that was just rampant. It practically galloped in our household when I was growing up. So, and eventually I became, as part of this journey, I guess, I became a game designer at TSR Incorporated back in the early 80s, and hopefully made an impact there. My wife and I, um, as part of the backstory, and we'll get to that, I'm sure, in a minute, but my wife and I brought the idea of narrative to game when it came to role-playing games.
Yeah.
There'd been some efforts in, before that, but primarily dungeoning when we came to the TSR at that point was um, usually ranch-style dungeons,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not a lot of multi-level. They just kind of spread out. Pardon me. Um, and not a lot of story. You'd go in, you'd kill the monster, take its treasure, come out, buy bigger weapons, kill bigger stuff, take more treasure.
Right.
But we brought narrative into the concept of woven narrative into the RPG experience, for better or worse.
Right.
Some
Right.
people um, in the early stages, and maybe rightly, felt like there was a lot of railroading going on in the game. But the whole concept of experiential narrative
Mm.
was new, and so we had to learn the rules as well
Right.
as we worked and went along. So that's who I am. I'm the Ravenloft guy. I'm the Dragonlance guy. Uh, yeah,
Yeah. You're the killer breakfast guy.
I am the killer breakfast guy. Absolutely, and I miss killer breakfasts. They're exhausting.
It's a tough way to start a day.
It is. It is a very tough way to start a day. It actually was Harold Johnson that caused that, by the way.
All right. Well, we'll get to that. So we've got Dave and Linnea are here. Hello, Dave and Linnea. Jeff Grubb says, "Hey, hey," and
Hey, Jeff, love you, my friend. Miss you, and love to
Weldon
Kate.
Jen comes in
Oh,
and
and oh,
says,
nice.
"We long live Dragon Strahd. Strahd."
Yeah,
What's
yeah,
going
right. Well,
on?"
Strahd's dead, but never mind. It's nice to see you,
So,
Weldon.
speaking of, so I'm going to grab my pad. So, for those who care about such things, I'm working on an iPad with the app Procreate and an Apple Pencil. None of this is sponsored, but I'm always open to that if Apple or Procreate want to have a conversation. Um, but I need to get myself prepared here. There we go. And I can bring that up on the screen. So you see, I'm going to be doing my cartoon homage to the Clyde Caldwell art for
Clyde
Raven.
Caldwell cover for Ravenloft, the first Ravenloft. Yes, love
Uh,
that piece.
so let's start with how you got into Dungeons and Dragons, which we've been starting in the early years, and the first couple of shows, you're talking with people who were around at the very start, people who played on at Gary's table and such. I was lucky enough to get Jim Ward in a couple of weeks before he sadly
No,
left us, and Skip and some other people who were there. But you were not a Lake Geneva person, right? So how was it that Dungeons and Dragons came into your life?
well, Dungeons and Dragons came into my life because of my wife. It was Laura Hickman who got me into D&D.
Okay.
Now, I'd played games with my family most of my life. I mean, when we were a gaming family, yeah, but in that sense, we're talking like Parker Brothers and Milton Bradley. And
Right.
every summer or every Christmas time, we always looked forward to the brand new exciting game that was being pushed on Saturday morning cartoons, and that we'd see the commercials for and get all excited for the new game. Every Christmas, there's always a couple of family board games underneath the tree, and it was always an important thing during the holidays that our family would all get together. My dad had actually taken an oak, I think it was an oak um, dining room table that he'd
Mm.
found someplace, cut down the pedestal so that it was more like coffee table size, but it was this huge round table that was low to the shag carpet at the time, and and we would play these big games together, and it was always family to me to be able to sit there and gather with my dad. It was one of the few things that he and I could enjoy together. My father's very sports oriented. This was not me. I was very nose in the book kind of a kid. So my father would, and my mother and my brother and I would gather together around tables and always play these board games. So I loved board games growing up. Well, I life went on, and um, I met a young girl in junior high school by the name of Laura Curtis, and and we when we got to high school we dated, and then we didn't date, and then we dated again, and that was high school. And I went overseas as a missionary for 2 years, and when I came back after all the dust had settled, she was standing there at the gate, the arrival gate at the airport,
Oh.
and we got married 3 months later. So we
Okay,
were li-
so there's a story. This is the first time I'm hearing that. I mean, I
yeah.
know you guys for quite a long while. I know what an awesome couple you are. I know how awesome Laura is on her own. But wow, what a great romantic story.
Well, I came home. She's not here, so I can tell this story. I came home,
Don't get yourself
and
in trouble.
no, I won't get myself in trouble. This will be fine. I came home, and I came to where she was living at the time. She was living in I think um, excuse me, just near Anaheim at the time.
Mm.
So I came to visit right after I'd gotten home. I mean, like the week after I got home. Came down and stayed with her mother, and her and her mother in her home. And she said, "I don't want to talk about marriage. I don't want to talk about it. I just, I've had some bad experiences while you were gone. I just want to talk about it. Okay." I was okay, and I was there for like a week, and we got along so great. Fine. Well, her mother, I had been calling her mother mom since like before I left to be a missionary, and she was bedridden at the time, and so she like ruled the household like the Queen of France, right? She'd be sitting in her bed, and everyone would come to her, right, pay homage. And I was going to be going home like a couple of days afterwards, and I'd really wanted to go to Disneyland. So I came in, and we were going to go to Disneyland this day, and she calls me into her bedroom.
Yeah.
Mom does. And I said, "Yeah, Mom, what can I do for you?" And she said, "Young man, I want you to promise me before you leave, you will ask my daughter to marry you." And I said, "Mom, look, we've already kind of talked about it." She said she didn't want to talk about marriage. It's just, not. No, she said, "You promise me, young man, that you will ask her to marry you before you leave." Okay, yes, Mom, I promise. I promise I will ask her. I figured I was pretty safe since she's already said pretty much she didn't want to talk about it.
Right.
So I went out to get the car. She calls her daughter in. She calls Laura in, and she says, "Young lady, if he asks you to marry him, you say yes." And she said, "Mom," and her mother said, "No, he treats you better than anybody has ever treated you before. So if he asks you, you promise me that you'll say yes.
And she's
She said,
feeling
okay.
good that you won't ask because she's already told you.
Yeah, because she's told me not to ask, so she figures she's safe. So off we go for a day at Disneyland, and her mom figures that the deal's done. We're at Disneyland and having a really great time. And she said, "Well, where should we have lunch?" And I thought, "Wow, the Blue Bayou sounds really nice. I've never been there before."
Hmm.
So we go into the Blue Bayou for lunch, and it's oh dang, it's romantic. I mean, there's like fireflies and it's like
Hmm.
evening on the bayou, and oh great, this is it. I promised. Okay. So we go in, we order lunch, and I I lean across the table. I mean, look, I am this smooth, Stan. Okay, I want you to know I am. This is as smooth as I get. So I leaned across the table and I said, "I don't want to spoil your day or anything, but will you marry me?" She was so shocked. She grabbed me by my very wide lapels. By the way, this was in the mid-70s. Whispered yes, and I was so relieved, and she was so nervous and upset she couldn't eat her lunch. I was so relieved. I ate both the lunches. It was just
And that sounds like that's a form of a marriage there.
well. Now the thing was, we're going to go on we getting married, and she's getting ready for the marriage, and she's getting ready for the honeymoon, and she says to um, her mother, "Hey, I think I'll like go buy a risk game so that we'll have something to play."
Hmm?
And her mother says, "Honey, you do not need to. He is not going to want to play Risk with you, okay?" And my wife was totally crushed. She
Hmm.
thought, "Oh man, we're not going to ever have fun together here with this." Okay, fine. Turns out we both love games, and we get married. We have our honeymoon. We go and we settle in Provo, Utah, in our first apartment there, and we look, and this was 70. This was 77, summer of 77. And I look, he said, "Let's go to a movie. We got some money from our wedding presents. Let's go to a movie." And I pulled out the newspaper, because that's what you did back in those ancient of days, right? Pulled out the newspaper to see what was playing. And here was this new movie just come out called Star Wars. And I thought, oh, I want to see this movie so bad. But how am I going to talk my sweet new bride into going to this science fiction movie, right? I had no idea that my wife was actually a science fiction nut. She absolutely loved sci-fi. She grew up watching like Buck Rogers on TV with her brother, and Star Trek was a big thing for her. And so she saw the ad and she wanted to go to it, but she didn't know quite how to tell her husband that she wanted to go to this crazy science fiction movie. So we did this kind of dance around it. Well, what do you think? This looks like it might be good. Yeah, I think it could be good. Maybe we should go do that. We talk each other into it. Drove out there. It was the best thing either of us had ever seen. We came home flying TIE fighters in our Volkswagen. It was great. So, as it turns out, to get back to the original question,
Right.
as it turns out, um, I was working three jobs actually at this time. I was driving school bus for the Nebo School District. I was working at a genealogical supply shop, which meant that I was a drill press operator, and I was
Okay.
managing a local movie theater. Well, I'd gone out to my job at this drill press job, and my wife was supposed to come pick me up, and she didn't show up. Oh, the honeymoon's over, right? So I get on my bicycle. I knew she was helping a friend with the drama group. Went down to find the troupe, the theater, and sure enough, the Volkswagen's there. Oh, great, she is here. So she comes out and she's just excited, and she said, "Oh, I played the best game. It's the best game ever. You just got to come play this game. This is the best game I've ever played." And I said, "Well, okay, what is it?" And she said, "Oh, it's this fantastic game." And I said, "Okay, fine. What does the board look like?" And it doesn't have one, really. I said, "Okay, fine. What are the rules then?" And she said, "Well, they're kind of flexible." This sounded like the stupidest game I'd ever heard of. So she bought me a copy of the Blue Basic set.
It always starts with a blue book.
It all starts with the Blue Book, yeah. And we all know, of course, that the Blue Book was the Blue Book because they could only afford one color on the cover. And they didn't want it to be black, so they used blue. And the dice, here, let's see here. Here we are.
I did a couple of weeks ago. I did the cover of the blue book was the picture I did while we were doing it.
Oh, yeah, see? All right, here is a piece of memorabilia for you.
No,
This is my original D20
here.
from that blue set. You can see the edges on it are so worn down.
Right.
You can roll this side, it will never stop.
And
And
for
I,
the youngins in there, why are some of those sides painted red?
well, some of them are painted red because I hand painted them red because the dice in the blue set came with a crayon so that you could color in the numbers because nobody was making polyhedral dice.
Because they weren't. It was just 1 to 0 twice. There were no
Yeah,
numbers, right?
yeah. So you had to like paint it in somehow. Yeah, and I've still got it. Here it is.
It's
This is my
amazing.
D20.
I wish I still had my original dice.
Laura gave me this. Was going to give me the blue basic set for my birthday, which is in November.
Right.
But she got so excited about it, she could not wait, and she gave me my birthday present a month early for Halloween. I pulled out the rules book. I started reading it. It was really bad. I mean, it was not well written. It was incomplete. It had lots of like frayed ends that didn't quite go anywhere, and tables for things that weren't actually referenced in the rules quite yet.
Yeah.
But I
Yet
got
it
it.
was still awesome.
It was still awesome, and I got what they were doing. And I just had and suddenly she was a D&D widow for like 2 weeks. I went out that night, got some graph paper, and I was just making dungeons. I was attending college at the time, and and I was attending a motivational. I can still remember I was attending a motivational psychology class,
Yeah.
and it was the least motivating class I had ever attended. And sat in the back of that and drew dungeons. So we were creating this stuff, and ultimately, and we were doing this together because it wasn't enough for us that we just have a um, just go into a dungeon and steal stuff. We wanted story involved in it, and so my wife came up with a dungeon called Rahasia. And I did the maps and did the design work for it, and she created the story, and we did this together, and it was just wonderful to work together. And And about this time, first edition was coming out.
All right,
I
let me
have
let
my
me just let me just pause for half a second because we had some more
yeah.
people come in. Uh, Jeff Grubb says he misses you a bunch.
I
Uh,
know I miss him too, man.
Dale Donovan says hi.
Hey, Dale.
Uh, Kevin Melka says hi.
Hey, Kevin.
Darren Drader comes in, says Tracy is a huge fan of your work.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know if you've ever
Thank
met
you.
Darren. Darren's a very good designer too.
Oh,
Uh,
excellent. We need to have a party, is what we need to
yeah,
do. Yeah.
we should all convene somewhere.
I here I've got stuff. I brought stuff for show and
Ooh.
tell.
And Becky Meyer says about your die, it's almost round.
It is almost round. Yes, I have used this so much,
And
but then this happened.
oh yeah, her husband says your dice become a part of you, and ain't that the truth?
Yes, it is. It could explain my knees at this point. So first edition started coming out. These are my original first edition books,
mm,
and I can remember we couldn't afford these. I mean, this is like a month's pay to buy one of these books. Yeah.
and they were $15.
Well, like I say,
It's the '70s. I remember. I couldn't afford
yeah.
them either.
And as it turns out, when the Dungeon Master's Guide came out, I actually used my student loan money to buy our Dungeon Master's Guide, our DMG. And in the event, I mean, it turned out to be a much better investment than
Yeah.
my college education. So it came to the point where we could see, my wife said, look, we're spending an awful lot of money on this game. If we're going to spend the money on this game, we have to find a way to make money at it. And that's when we started doing our own homegrown dungeons. Rahasi was the first one that we published, by the way, with absolutely no concept of copyright law whatsoever.
Right.
And we
So
we
where
would
is it that you thought that you would sell it?
well back then you could sell it directly into a distributor, and they were kind of hungry for product anyway. I mean, it wouldn't take much to become like the number 4 game producer in role playing games at the time.
Right.
You had TSR and you had Judges Guild, and then the
But
rest.
how did you know that? And you let you say you were a college student and you were working these three other jobs. You you through your family you had a background in theater, but it doesn't sound like there was any publishing. What got you to? How did you get to the point where you understood enough to do that?
Well, actually, the local game store, Randy at the local game store, he said, "Well, make them, and I'll try and sell them here, and I can get you in touch with distributors." And I had some kind of really rudimentary publishing that I'd learned in like junior high and high school,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we made our first books. The first adventure was Rahasia that we did. Um, I, and this was archaic times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would type out the text in columns on an IBM Selectric typewriter, right? And it wouldn't justify for you, right? So you'd get to near the end of the line and you'd add slash marks until
Right.
it came to the even edge. Then you'd go take that paper and you'd count the number of slash marks at the end and insert spaces between the words to manually justify the text. Then you'd have to go back and retype it, adding those spaces so that the right hand side would be even as well as the left hand side. And then we would take those strips of text and we would cut them with scissors and then we would glue them onto page forms with rubber cement. And we would use some rub-on lettering also for like titles and things like that. And we would make these, these handmade layouts with, cut up paper and rubber cement and and kind of scratch on lettering and tape like that had different patterns on it. This
Yeah.
clear tape with patterns on it. And we would make each page, and then we would take those into the photocopy place, photocopy them double sided. We would take those home, and we would. And I worked this place. This genealogy place I had worked at had an offset press, and they would like print covers for us on what was called leatherette at the time. And then we would take those home too, and we had some bookbinding tape, and we do a back cover. It wasn't printed. Who could afford that? A back leatherette blank, and then we would assemble all of the pages, and then we would put the front cover on it, staple it together on the edge, and then use binding tape to finish off um, the bound edge. All of this by hand. My wife and I, in our little apartment on a card table, which is all we had, and like that, we did that for Rahasia, and then we did it again. We did it for Pharaoh, and we were planning a third adventure, two more adventures actually. Um, oh no, three more adventures. The third one was supposed to be Vampire. The fourth one was supposed to be Eye of the Dragon, and the fifth one was called Brimstone. We had all the covers for these on the back fly sheet that we'd like tip into the thing. And like I said, no concept whatsoever of copyright. You
Right.
know, we just, yeah, okay. And we put those out. Um, we put the first two out, Rahasia and Pharaoh. Well, times got tough. I lost my jobs in Provo. Left my job in Provo to manage a theater in Logan, Utah. While I was in Logan, Utah, I lost that job. Could not find work.
Mm.
Was out of work for about 6 months, I think, um, and tried to start something up. That failed miserably. Um, and we were actually on church welfare at the time.
Mm.
Um, we couldn't, I can remember we couldn't take our kids to church because we couldn't afford shoes for them that winter.
Mm.
So but we had heard that if you would sell an adventure um, to TSR, that they would pay like $500
A
for an
princely
adventure.
sum.
A princely sum, a mighty sum, life-changing sum. And so in an effort to buy shoes for our children that winter, we sent in copies of Rahasia and Pharaoh and talked about Vampire as the
Mm.
third. As it happened, Michael Gray was working at TSR at the time, and he had already bought those at the local dungeon hobby shop.
Mm.
And when it came in, they called us. They called us on the neighbor's phone because our phone had been disconnected, and said, it would be easier for us to buy these if you worked for us. flew me out. Flew me out from Salt Lake City to Milwaukee.
Right.
I was picked up at the airport by Steve Sullivan.
Who we've had on here as a show a couple of times.
Yeah, Steve picked me up at the airport and drove me back to Lake Geneva. And he was so young. I thought he was
How
like some.
young was he?
He was so young that I thought he was like, an intern at the company, some flunky that they had sent out just, to pick me up and drive me in. And so we had this really nice conversation going back to Lake Geneva because I wasn't like feeling any pressure. I mean, this is just some Joe, right? I can talk to him. And so I came into the company the next morning to be interviewed, and here he was sitting across the desk. And, okay. But the interview went well, and I was introduced around to a lot of different designers at the time. I remember meeting Mark Akers on the second floor, and yeah, a couple of them. And Zeb, met Dave Cook, I remember
Yeah.
at the time. And so um, we Jeff Grubb wasn't there yet, and um, I got, it all went well. Harold Johnson was there.
Hmm.
Harold took me to the Playboy Club for dinner.
For
Yeah,
those who don't know, there were Playboy clubs, and that's where Gary Con is now. It's the
that's where
San
Gary Con
Geneva.
is now. So off we went, and I came. They flew me back home, and I got my job offer at the neighbor's phone. Um, they advanced us money, I think, on based on uh, Rahasi and Faro, based on Faro primarily, which was enough for us to like put our things in a moving van, what little we had, get in our little Volkswagen Rabbit, and become the first people in my family to cross the plains in the other direction. Um, while we were driving across Kansas somewhere, which is a lot of flat, I remember my wife and I were chatting along the way. We had our two babies in the back at the time in the back seat, and I remember we were talking about what can we bring to this company um, that would like justify them paying us money to make games.
Right. You've done something. What have you done for them lately?
Yeah, and it was coming across the plains that we came up with the name Dragonlance and the basic story of what of this world of riding dragons into war,
Right.
and thought maybe that'd work. Came into Lake Geneva. I think we came in on St. Patrick's Day. It was snowing. I
Hmm.
remember that. We went out. We stayed, I think, downtown at the hotel downtown, out on the lake front,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd paid for the room, but meals were on our own. So I went back out into the snow, and I got Chinese food from Sue Wings,
Which Jeff tells me is still there.
which I believe is still there. Yeah, and 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 a box of ding dongs. I remember. Came home and came back to the hotel. Kids were all there on their bed, and the Quiet Man had come on the television,
Yeah. Well,
and so
St.
we
Patrick's Day.
St. Patrick's Day. So I remember we had Chinese while watching the Quiet Man, and when we got out the ding dongs, they were wrapped in like a foil, and we called them Blarney Stones. And everyone kissed their Blarney Stone before they ate their ding dong. And that's how we got started. The first day, we found a little place to stay out near Elkhorn in a um, modular home. And the first day of work, I reported a half an hour before they started. I was so excited to get back to work and to work at this
Right.
that I like sat in my car for a half an hour before someone showed up to open the door to the old hotel building downtown.
Steve
Yeah.
Steve Winter was telling us a story about at least one time when no one showed up for quite a long time, so someone had to climb in an upper floor window to let everyone in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have to understand. I think I
And you
think
couldn't
at
do
the
that on your
time,
first day, I understand.
no, I couldn't do that on my first day. I didn't want to upset anybody. They they actually um when I did finally get in, they had to put me somewhere, and so they put me upstairs on the third floor in the conference room, which was in the northwest corner of the building. It was kind of it had kind of a beveled corner with windows that looked out onto the main street, the main crossroads of Lake Geneva there. And the build, as I understand it, the building itself, um, when they after they had bought the building, they discovered that the steel supports of the building were actually kind of rusting through, and the building was leaning. So they had to go in and put in new steel supports, but they couldn't like jack the building back up. So our end of the building kind of leaned out towards the street, but it was the safest part of the building because at least that side had been reinforced. So I was
Right.
installed in this conference room upstairs at this table with an HP monitor, right? That
Right.
was networked to a mainframe across town at the main building. Uh, there was no on-screen editing at the time. We are still talking Steam ages, so
Right.
you had to line edit anything that you wrote on this monitor. And I had an office chair with wheels on it, and if I would just sit in it, it would start to like roll away and turn away from the table and start rolling towards the windows and the street because the floor slanted. So I learned if I put my wrapped my foot behind one of the legs and dug my toe into the ground, that the chair would stay put and I could type without like moving away from and across the room. And I often still put that foot back there to make sure I don't roll away.
Why do you type like that, Tracy? Well, back in
Back in
19.
the day.
Let's see. Well, it's John Rhine. John Rhine has joined us also from the Dragonlance Nexus.
Hey,
Says that they
John.
all missed you at GaryCon a few weeks ago.
Oh, I was sorry I couldn't make it. It's been a rough time here. It was difficult for me to get away.
Yeah, yeah. Um, All right, so we've gotten you across the plains. We've gotten you to Lake Geneva. We got
Yeah.
things. Uh, I'm doing a drawing here based on Ravenloft, and in our pre-show, one of the things you said to me was, "Oh, I've got some stories about Ravenloft."
Oh, I could talk all night about Ravenloft.
Well, leave some time because I know people are also going to want you to say something about Dragonlance. But let's
Well,
start with Ravenloft.
no, I'm going to come back to Ravenloft. Let's start with Dragonlance. Just real quick on Dragonlance because we
One
can
of the
come
things I
back to
find
it.
interesting, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
one of
go
the things
ahead.
I find interesting because I mean I worked on Dragonlance for a while after you and Margaret had both left,
Yeah.
um, but Dragonlance uh, is having its 40th anniversary. This Dragonlance happened 10 years after the premiere of Dungeons and Dragons, which I think to some extent makes it difficult for Dragonlance to have big celebrations because every time it has a major birthday, D&D has a major
D&D
birthday
has a major
too.
birthday too. Yeah. It's like you were born on Christmas, you
Right.
know? When's the party?
So just say on top of the celebration next week, I'll tell you the secret for people who are watching. Next week is 19. We're going to be at 1984, which is a year that Dragonlance came out, and I'm going to be doing my homage to the cover of Dragons of Autumn Twilight.
Oh, wonderful.
So, but we've got Tracy here this week. So what? Let's back to you. I hand the microphone back to you, sir.
Well, I Dragonlance is interesting because, as I mentioned, my wife and I came up with the name and the basic concept for it coming across the plains. When we
Right.
got to the company, we hadn't been there terribly long, I don't think. When back at that time, companies were very much into consultants.
So I was pretty sure this story you were going to tell.
Yeah, yeah. So the company hired an outside firm to come in and analyze TSR and their products and to tell them their business
Yeah.
because apparently nobody at the company knew how this worked. So this outside consulting firm came in and did this big and extremely costly analysis of Dragonlance, or no, excuse me, of TSR. And I can still remember we had called this big, there was this big meeting that was called, and I think it was Penny who read the synopsis of their recommendations. And their recommendations, I can still remember them. One, your main core business is Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, not surprising. Two, you have lots of dungeons. Three, need more dragons.
Please send $10,000.
Please send $10,000 and thank you for your time. So this call kind of went out among the designers for proposals. We would all do proposals for products, and they would all go in the hamper, and Gary or the Blooms would go through them and decide what was going to work and what wasn't going to work. And everybody was supposed to now submit something that had something with dragons in it, for crying out loud, because we already had enough dungeons. And that's when I wrote up this proposal for Dragonlance and submitted it. And I wanted very much, because of the work that my wife and I had done in narrative,
Hmm.
wanted very much for Dragonlance to not just be like the dragon of the month, right? Where we kill a
Right.
black dragon, we take its stuff. We kill a white dragon, we take its stuff, right? And I wanted to link all of it with the narrative that with this, riding dragons into war narrative that my wife and I had come up with. So, but the question then became, how do we sell that, to the company?
Right.
And I'd submitted the ideas, and they said, "Yeah, this is definitely in the running, but how do we sell it?" Um, so Harold Johnson and Harold was a big actor in the process early on. And I think he was manager of the designers at the time. Anyway, Harold and I went to the artists, um, particularly Larry Elmore and Jeff Easley and Keith Parkinson and Clyde Caldwell, uh, and and Diesel, I think, was involved,
Yeah.
and and we actually met at Larry Elmore's basement outside of work hours and told him this story of the Dragonlances and how they were going to war, and there was this great dragon that was coming from the past and they had to be stopped, uh, and Larry in particular was really connected with this. And so we asked the artists, look, we have to sell this to the company, we need some art for it, can you help us with just like some art that's not assigned?
Yeah.
And Larry got so excited about it and so invested in it that he made 4 oil paintings, of the story for Dragonlance, and they depicted some of the main characters. I mean, that the characters remained constant from the early concept on. He did Tasselhoff.
Hmm.
He did Riverwind and Goldmoon and Sturm and Karaman and Raceland. I mean, and Tanis. I mean, and Lorana. All of these characters were already manifest in early on, and they created this art on their own time.
And I know I've seen. I mean, these a lot of these have been printed, and I've seen them. I know that Jeff Grubb has one of them hanging in his game room.
Yeah,
That so I get to see that on a fairly regular basis. And you're right. One of the most amazing things to me about that, as someone who works, creatively, is how much even in those first paintings, which, as you say, were done based on an afternoon of you describing a story that hadn't really been written yet. How
yeah.
clearly the characters have taken form, even in those first paintings.
Even in those first paintings, Larry got so excited about it. He used to be an artist for the Air Force, a technical artist in the Air Force for the Air Force, and on his own, he came up with an exploded drawing of how Dragonlance mounts worked.
Hmm,
Yeah, I mean, and I think we've seen it in several places,
right.
but he did that on his own time just because he wanted to understand how to paint it. He had to deconstruct it, and so that he would know how they worked and what it would look like in the painting. It was this kind of it was this kind of ambitious creativity
Right.
that was really very rampant early on at TSR, certainly among the designers and and the artists that were there, and in many ways, in spite of management. I mean,
Right.
we couldn't help ourselves. Um, I was in a when I was in that corner room. I was I was in the corner room in there that was actually supposed to be the conference room, and so we got invaded every now and then. But I was settled when I got settled in this conference room. I was soon joined by Michael Williams and Tim Kilpin,
Mm.
and there was just so much creativity going on in the air that I mean, we wrote a musical. It was called Trademark Jail, and it was the best Elvis Presley movie made since he died. I still remember one of the songs. The movie was called Trademark Jail, and Jim Ward was part of it too. Yeah, we were trying to get it filmed. Jim Ward, I think his character was called Otis Elevator.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Anyway,
Meanwhile,
meanwhile,
so
meanwhile,
I want.
we had this proposal, right?
Yeah.
And I was the only one, I think, of the designers who owned a suit. So I put my suit on and I went around to each of the department heads that was
Hmm.
going to be in this meeting, pitched them individually, got each of them individually to say, this is cool, we should do this. So that by the time we got to the meeting, everyone had already said yes, except Gary. But in the event of it, after we pitched it to Gary, he said, he stood up and he said, this is exactly what we should be doing. And that was it. Dragonlance began.
And so you did.
And so we did.
All right. Now I know that we could talk about Dragonlance, and
All night, but we're
yeah,
not going to do that.
no, mainly because and not so much because I'm drawing Ravenloft, because I've been, you know, on past shows drawing something different that we're talking about lots. But one of the things you talked about earlier, and I don't, not that got glossed over, but I think it's hard for modern gamers to really understand when you talk about bringing the narrative to the game, and how Ravenloft was one of the first uh, products, not just from TSR, but in popular gaming. One of the first widely known products to be built as a narrative, as opposed to forget what term you used earlier, uh, uh, but kind of a situational uh,
Mm-hmm.
adventure. And really, I'm going to take my I'm host so I can pontificate for a second option here. But we've talked in the past about the fact that D&D's roots come out of miniatures gaming, and a lot of the early games are based off of assumptions on that kind of play. What Ravenloft, and this is, I mean, we'll be fair, other people had thought about putting story into it, but it hadn't ever been an essential. They put story into something and then had a game that was still a situational game. Ravenloft was designed as a game where the story, where what was happening narratively, is not just a frill that you hang on it. It is crucial to how the adventure is played.
Yes.
So,
We had I had actually, before we came to TSR, I had played a one of your typical dungeon games. And we'd go down a corridor and there'd be a kobold. Then we'd beat up the kobold, and then we'd go and we'd open the door and there was a guard room and there were a couple of orcs and we beat up the orcs, and okay, fine. And then we went down another corridor and we turned a corner and there was a vampire. And I remember
okay,
thinking at the time, what are you doing here? You're a vampire. You're like a lord of the night, right? Why are you just hanging around this corridor, for crying out loud? And I know that he was like on some random dungeon table,
right,
right? So, I mean, ultimately that is the answer, right? But no, I thought this is just too cheap. This is a character who really needs background, who needs story, who needs a reason for being here.
right,
And that's where Ravenloft was born. My wife and I did an extensive study of vampire lore literature. Discovered that prior to Bram Stoker, one of the first examples of the modern vampire, other than traditional folklore, but one of the first examples of the modern vampire came from a Dr. Polydorus, who was a physician, I believe, to Lord Byron.
hmm,
And on that same weekend, when Mary Shelley and the guests were challenged to come up with a scary story,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Polydorus wrote a story called The Vampire,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially a vampire archetype. Many people who've looked at the Polydorus script have believed that this was actually Polydorus um, trying to tell Byron what a monster he is. That he's a Bluebeard, that he's a user of women and an abuser of women with no remorse. Very much a Bluebeard character.
Right.
Uh, and we see this actually very much reflected in Bram Stoker's own work, where we have the handsome, alluring, passionate, or passion-inspiring vampire, but who is morally bankrupt and bereft, and who is a true monster. He has no identification with anything but himself.
Right.
Um, and so, from Polydorus to Bram Stoker, the vampire is essentially a cautionary tale for women, to warn them of the Bluebeard, away from the too good-looking man, the Bluebeard character, the person who seems like he's too nice, too handsome,
Right.
and yet who is absolutely self-serving. So, having gone deep into this vampiric lore, my wife and I decided we wanted to do a setting that was set up specifically for that.
Right.
That would feature the vampire as a not just another NPC, but as a major character in a drama that was taking place,
Right.
and a narrative story that was taking place. And that's where Ravenloft. That's how Ravenloft was born. A lot of the setting has a lot of the feeling of the Universal horror films. At least that's kind of how we saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the characters, as I've said, we needed characters that were integral to the story. Ravenloft did something that I think um, really makes it work, which is that it doesn't present a single narrative,
Yeah.
but it presents multiple narrative paths that are all bound up in the Taroka Visani Taroka cards,
Right.
the Madame Eva's tarot reading. I love Madame Eva's tarot reading. It is a tremendous predictive device, because once you get Madame Eva's tarot reading that predicts your future, it essentially sets what that future is going to be. It moves the vampire to different places. It changes his motivations. It changes locations of other items within the game. So
And
even if you
I would say, and what the players do further change that. That
That's right.
I mean that, and that's when we talk about a narrative game. That's the innovation. And I say other uh, modules I know have tried. They tried to put that in, but this was, you
Yeah.
could not run Ravenloft without engaging in that. It didn't exist as an A B C D. It only existed in this narrative web, which
Yes.
change each time.
Yes. And at the very heart and center of everything that goes on here is this vampire character
Who
whom you
has
really
motivations?
who has motivations for what he's
Yes.
doing. So that's kind of been a cardinal rule for us. Um, um, every villain believes that they are right,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to believe that they are right so that their actions make sense. And this is absolutely true of Strahd, who is. Oh, there's a phrase that I often think on, which is that, and Satan knew not the mind of God,
Mm,
and Strahd is very much that way. He doesn't he does not see the fallacy in his argument.
right.
He cannot see that he is the bad guy here. The villagers all want to take me out with pitchforks. Man, what is wrong with them?
Don't they understand?
Don't they understand that all I really want is to earn the love of the woman that I've loved all of my life and that was stolen from me by my younger brother? Don't they see how it's only just that I take these things? And that's
Yeah.
and once you understand that about Strahd, then he can he may not become a sympathetic character, but he does become an understandable character. One of my favorite sayings is, um, "How can we be strangers now that I know your story?"
Right. Right.
And if you understand the story of the vampire, you may not have sympathy for him, but you can understand the tragedy of what he represents.
And that, I mean, I just even beyond Straw. That's one of the problems in modern narrative. Modern narrative that seeks to get that perspective of the monster and create some kind of empathy with them. And the idea is supposed to be, I think, that empathy makes you go, "Oh my God, I could be a monster too if I'm not careful." And it,
Yes,
too often in modern storytelling, we they don't get to that part. They just have it. Oh, he's sympathetic, and now you have a good monster, and they leave off the part where no, no, he's still a monster. He's
he's
just a
still a
monster.
monster. He still has to die. Okay.
Right.
I mean, this is why vampires in Ravenloft do not glow or glitter,
Right.
because um, I going back to the roots of all of this. If in fact vampires are an archetype of predators on women,
Yeah.
then aren't we doing a disservice if we simply say, "Oh, if we love the vampire hard enough, he'll be okay"?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the same argument that every abused woman has ever made.
Yeah.
So, so for me, there's a lot more here in Ravenloft than just kind of a monster tale.
Yeah.
We used to play Ravenloft every Halloween, and um, was it? I remember playing this Ravenloft once with a friend of mine, and he had come to understand the story of Strahd. That yeah, he's in pain. He caused his own pain, and yet they had to destroy him. So he came upon him in Tatiana's crypt. The cards had just played out that way. And so here was the vampire at Tatiana's crypt weeping over the crypt.
Right.
And he knew they had to kill him, but at the same time he couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it. but everybody else in the party like went in and just fell on him, like, and took him out. It was the end of the game.
Hmm.
And this one guy came to me afterwards and he said, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And I said, yeah, but he needed killing. And just because we understand him doesn't mean that we have to spare him.
Right.
And it was a hard lesson for him, but it was a narrative that he had generated within himself in the process and course of the game. Narrative is an interesting thing. We uh, all of us think in narrative.
Hmm.
It's how we perceive the world. We take in the sights, the sounds, the smells, the senses, proprioception, all of it. And the only way we make sense of it, literally sense of it, is to formulate it into a story.
Right.
And we do this naturally and constantly. It's why books work. Uh, uh, and so, when it comes to role playing, though, when it came to Ravenloft in particular, what we were discovering is that we set up the narrative framework, but the actual story that takes place is created during play.
Right.
It's created in the interaction between the DM and the players. It's also between the players themselves, amongst themselves, and reacting with the DM. It's that is a unique narrative that is generated in the course of play, that is sparked by the overarching narrative
Right.
of the environment.
Well, I mean, in a role playing game, in a novel or a TV show or even a movie, you have the possibility that the vampire story will become, you say, as you understand it, it becomes the you change it so he's the protagonist in your head. In a role playing game, your character is never not going to be the protagonist. No matter how much you understand
That's
that
right.
vampire, he's still trying to kill you, and you take it kind of personally.
Well, that's right. I mean, you're absolutely right in that every player is the protagonist of their own story.
Yeah,
Which means, actually, if you think about it, that there are multiple stories that are being generated constantly in the role playing
in
game,
every game. Yeah,
in every game, that is unique to each player. Their
it's one of the things I
perspective
love
is
about
unique.
role playing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get, I
Absolutely.
mean, you definitely get a Rashomon kind of. Every scenario has its own, for to a greater or lesser extent, Rashomon experience where the story is different depending on who's telling it.
That's right. That's right. John Steinbeck said that there are as many books as there are readers,
Mm,
because every reader brings his own perspective, his own understanding, his own
yeah,
prejudices to the text. When the actual text of a book, or an adventure for that matter, is relatively small. I
mm,
mean, the actual data that is there. I mean, you take a picture with your phone today, and its file size is going to be much bigger than an entire novel.
yeah,
It's this interaction where the person who's reading the text or is interpreting it in terms of the game, as they read it, in
mm,
that white space that's in between the words, all the sights and the sounds and the smells and the experience of what's going on is generated in their mind,
yeah,
and it's unique to them.
yeah,
People often will come up to me and tell me, will want to start telling me about a game, a Ravenloft that they had played,
right.
right, or a Curse of Strahd that they had played. And I, on the one hand, I mean, I wrote it, so what are you trying to tell me? What I've learned is that they're not trying to tell me what was on the page. What they're trying to tell me is about their performance
Yeah,
of those moments and their interpretation of those moments, and that is unique to each of them. So Ravenloft, it very much, and still, I think it still plays beautifully today.
Yeah.
And I think Curse of Strahd actually turned out to be. I was able to consult on Curse of Strahd,
Hmm.
so um, and tell them that yeah, he's got to be a monster, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think their execution of that followed the idea very very
Yeah. I
well.
think I agree. I think Curse of Strahd is a very fitting. I don't want to say homage, but it pairs well. It is a fitting uh, descendant of
Yes,
the original module.
yeah, much. I'm very very proud of Curse of Strahd and what they were able to achieve with it. Probably more so than say other things that they've done, but that's another day.
And we all have our own stories.
Yes, we do. We all have our own stories.
All right, so we've been going a bit over an hour. I'm going to stop what I'm drawing here now. As anyone who's watched before, I'm going to finish this over the next few days. I will show it to the world next week. But if you want to see it as soon as possible, then you might want to become a subscriber to this show's Substack, 50 years in the dungeon.substack.com. It's free. There are paid levels. Of course, I'd love it if maybe you want to consider those. But if you join it for free, you'll get to see this as soon as it's done, and you'll get other inside information on what's going on. I'll say that again before the end of the show, but enough said for now. Tracy, yeah, these conversations always we just get going, and I'm like, it's been an hour and 15 minutes. So before we wrap up, I do want to talk about a how the 50th anniversary, and B about maybe we'll have you back again because you've got a lot of stories to tell. We've
I
just
got a
gotten
lot to
to
talk about.
we only got to the front end of Dragonlance. so, so we're wrong button stand. There we go. So yeah, it's the 50th anniversary of D&D this year. Um, you've been playing for quite a while. I've been playing for quite a while. What? I don't know. Are there any? I know just the fact that it's the 50th year makes me stop and think. Is there anything that you've had pop into your head about this, or that you, when reflecting on it, you think is worth mentioning or chewing around?
Yeah, you and I've been around, from nearly the beginning. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we're the ones that are left, and and we have seen the history of D&D both from the player side, and we've also seen it um, from the corporate side,
Mm.
and all of the changes and the machinations, and and TSR is a trademark of. Oh wait, no, it would Wizards of the no. I'm sorry, Hasbro is a trademark of. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Um, and there have been good times and bad times in terms of the corporate side of things, and the company story of D&D is its own thing. Uh, and certainly, I think Joe Manganiello's documentary work has been fabulous at chronicling that, and I'm looking forward to that being released sometime. Um, uh, but what I think I'm most struck with about the 50th anniversary um, is all of the players,
Yeah.
because it's the people who played this game that made it big, that made it important, and that are still making it important.
Mm.
We wrote stuff because we had a passion for writing this stuff. We wanted to make these games, and we wanted to share these games. And but it was all those players out there that took our creations and added their own creations
Mm,
to it, who have made 50 years of D&D a phenomenal expression of creation, creativity, uh, passion, love. All of these things didn't come out of the boardroom, didn't come out of corporate decisions, didn't come out of marketing. All of this came because all of our hearts were in it. So when I think about D&D being 50 years old, I think about all of the great people that made that possible. And the great people that made that possible were all of the players across the world
mm,
who took this thing to their hearts and and who created new things every time
right.
that they played.
And just like you were saying about the people that want to come up and tell you about Ravenloft, right? It's one of the great things you've always seen going to conventions was people from all over getting together and being able to have that conversation of a shared experience.
Yeah.
They'd all done the same thing in their own living rooms, and they had a touchstone. And
Yeah.
and as you say, they all had individual stories, and it was real
That's right.
a billion times over.
That's right. So when I don't think about when I think about the anniversary of D&D, the 50th anniversary of D&D,
Mm.
I think about one killer breakfast years ago when Gary Gygax came to my game. And he came up on stage and we had a blast playing the game. And he was sitting there with just other players, just other people in the game,
Yeah.
playing the game. And we're singing our stupid songs in Killer Breakfast. And there's Gary and Gail in the front row just belting it out with everybody else. And at the end of that, the show was over, Killer Breakfast was done, and he came and he shook my hand with a big smile, that big Gary smile, and said that that was the most fun he'd had at a convention in years. And would it be okay if he brought his family next year to the game? Now, that was the last time I saw Gary.
uh,
He passed away before the next convention. But I get to remember Gary
yeah.
playing in my game, singing my dumb songs, and telling me what a great time that he had.
And that he
And
wanted to
what
do it again next year.
and that he wanted to do it again next year. What it to me that was the community, that is the community. That's all of us.
Yeah.
If Dungeons and Dragons has made it to 50th anniversary, it's because of all you people out there who played this game and took our dreams and dreamt them for yourselves.
So let me ask you. I'm sure I know that you are very tech savvy and stay on top of what's going on. Uh, the one of the big innovations in the last 15 years, and I think one of the things that's most responsible for the big boom of D&D recently has been the live live streaming or the live play uh, uh, where people get to see other people playing it. I think that uh, it's the best it's the best introduction to the game's ever had because it's always had that problem of if you haven't played it, you don't understand it. Kind of like you were saying when Laura was trying to explain to you what this game is. Well,
Yeah.
I'm aboard. Kind of loose rules, and oh, by the way, here's a 300-page rule book, right?
Uh-huh.
But if you see people playing it, you get it. Um, I think, but I've been really impressed by there's a million ways to interpret this, but two in particular. One are the people that are just like, I want to do exactly what those people on screen are doing. And then the other group that they don't want to do it. They just want to watch someone else doing it, right? They're not ready yet, but yet they can still interact with the shows by what's going on
Mm.
and seeing it. I don't think anyone saw that coming down the pike when it happened.
No, no, I don't
Um,
think so.
if you had to just close your eyes and make a Criswell predicts prediction of what's the thing that's no one sees coming down the pike that's we're gonna see uh, in the next in D&D's future going beyond these 50. What kind of things do you think might be there?
I think everyone has predicted down through the years that some new entertainment form, okay, or new technology is going to replace the old one completely, and
Right.
no one is ever going to do it again. Um, People thought, well, people are going to have radios in their own homes; they're never going to go to a theater anymore. Or people are going to have televisions in their house. Nobody's going to ever go to the movies anymore.
Yep.
But then movies had a resurgence, and because it's a different experience that takes place there. I think that there's a big motion. Um, I think there's a big motion currently toward technology
Mm-hmm.
and trying to turn the role playing experience into a video game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm I love tactile things. I like to feel things. I like to hold my miniature. I like to roll the dice. And I think that's part of the experience for me. What I think, we're developing an app for our Sky Raiders game that we kickstarted a couple of years back. And the absolute first rule of this app is that the play has to stay on the table.
Mm-hmm.
The app is good for like messaging each other. The app is especially the part that I'm excited about. The app is it's especially good at uh, PC knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
which the player may not have, but the PC does. And so we have a mechanic in Sky Raiders where you can through the app you can say, I'm going to consult this ancient hero or my knowledge about this ancient god or my knowledge from, again, all different types categories of knowledge. And if you are trained in that knowledge, if your character has the ability to have those, to tap into that information, that it will give it to you as a player and allow you to use it or not. And you
Mm-hmm.
can tell the other players, oh, I know about the history about this bridge. There were like these ancient people that came here and built this bridge in homage to this ancient war that took place. But that comes from the player, you know, rather than the DM,
Right.
saying, well, your character knows that this is in, which for me again puts the play on the table, puts the
Mm-hmm.
play around the table, but it focuses on the play that's happening on the table. I don't think that future technological advances are going to replace D&D. People might say, yeah, they will. Maybe virtual reality is going to replace, but I don't think so. Having worked in virtual reality for 10 years, it's a different experience. But the idea of the narrative, the experiential narrative that is woven by people around the campfire
Mm-hmm.
with dice, I think if technology is going to improve on that, it needs to focus itself on what play actually is. And I don't think that technology will replace that. I think technology is best used to enhance
Mm-hmm.
that, to enhance the narrative. I this game that I'm just finishing, the Sky Raiders game, has um, this ghost ship, and your moving through this ghost ship, and every time the ship's bell rings, it advances, and the corpses become more animated, and and there are these ghosts that are moving through the ship that represent like the major characters in the drama that took place here. And you can bind yourself to one of these ghosts, which means that whenever they speak, you're the only one who hears their voice. And when you get multiples of these ghosts together in conversation, then you're only reading their part.
Right.
So so you get so suddenly the characters, the players begin speaking for the different ghosts and performing this kind of drama that's taking place and trying to guess the narrative, right? That's emerging from pieces of conversation. Um, I That's the kind of play,
Right.
actual play, that I think the future is holding for us. Um, virtual tabletops, yeah, great. I think they're going to be big, but at the same time, they're going to have to be malleable enough to be able to make quick changes. The DM needs to be able to make quick changes in
Yeah.
that. And I'm not sure actually that that is going to replace the theater of the mind
Yeah.
that, you know,
Darren Drader said here, and I don't know if you saw this. Virtual tabletop can bring people together from faraway places, and is probably the largest change in how some of us play. I think otherwise, the game is played pretty much as it always has been. I think that goes to what you're saying. Right? The best implementation of this technology is a way to let us do what we're already doing a little better, rather than
that's right.
uh, I mean, I've seen a lot of virtual tabletops which try to be like video games, and they get away from being like D&D. And they're wild, they're amazing, but I find that they are replacements for video games for me, not replacements. I finish that, and I still want to have a tabletop game with my friends.
I I once I once asked Richard Garriott about games, and he said, I said, why are the games keep getting bigger? And he said, that's because no game wins an award for the best game that runs on a 386 processor. And that's true. But at the same time, he said to me, the actual games that are being played on computers have really not changed that much since the 80s. They're prettier.
Yeah.
Everybody's spending a lot of money on graphics and environment. But the game itself, almost all games use the same movement structure, the same control structure, the same.
Right.
And that's because that's what people are liking to play. Role playing games, I think, yeah, there'll be technological advances, and Darren's absolutely true, absolutely right, that this has allowed people from distances to play together, which has been a big help to many of us who
Yeah.
have difficulty finding necessarily a group nearby. But at the same time, as I said, so much of it remains theater of the mind,
Right.
and that's where play is.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to say that despite the fact that I would love to keep talking to you all night, my friend, we should probably wrap it up. Uh,
Absolutely.
I'm going to take you off screen, but hold on, because I'll be back after I say goodbye to those virtual people out there.
Okay.
Right.
Bye,
Thank
virtual
you.
people.
Now, oh, before I take you off, is there anything you want to to plug while you're here? Is there anything you've got going on that folks should hear about?
Well, we have our new Dragonlance series. Margaret Weiss and I have been doing. First two books are out, and the third one comes out in August. A really wonderful story. I think everybody's going to love it.
What
And
are the titles?
there's Dragons of Fate, Dragons of Destiny. They're the story that Margaret and I really wanted to tell.
Mhm.
And the last one comes out in August. Very much looking forward to that. I'm working on some new stuff too, so find me on Facebook and we'll get you the word.
Right. Tracy Hickman. Find him on Facebook. All right, hold on, Tracy. I will be right back.
Okay.
Uh, but for now, I'm going to say that was a wow. Again, it's an hour and a half, and I feel like we just got started. We'll see if we can get Tracy to come back again and tell us some more stories, have a further conversation. In the meanwhile, I want to thank all of you for tuning in, whether you were here in our live group like Darren and Kevin and John. We had a lot of people here today. Weldon, uh, thank you all for being here. Those of you who are watching on replay, thank you too. Really appreciate it. It'd be great if you could just leave a little note in the chat. Tell us you're here. Tell us if there's anything you would like to ask Tracy. See if we can get some answers to that or bring him back and force him to answer it then. Uh, as I said before, we have a free newsletter for the show, which you can find at 50 Years in the Dungeon. It's 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com. You will get the completed art emailed to you in the newsletter when it's done. At some of the paying levels, you get things like the process videos that when I finish this, there'll be a video of the whole thing coming together. Everyone who is subscriber free and above will get the opportunity to buy art prints of all of these pieces, which I'm not going to make available to the general public. The only people that will get that are subscribers. So there you go. You come in for free and you have access to something no one else does. Sounds pretty good to me. 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com. Come on over. I'd really appreciate it. And wherever you're watching this right now, another thing I'd appreciate is if you could just take a second and click the like or the bell or the heart or whatever it is on that platform and leave a little message. These things really help with getting the platform to recommend the show to other people. I know everyone on every show asks you why. They don't always tell you why. The thing that really helps is not that I need the pat on the back of you saying, I love it, Stan, I love it. Although, who doesn't like to hear that? What it does is help with the algorithm so that we can let more people know about the show and have some more people join us for these fun conversations. So next week, Jeff Grubb is going to be my guest, and we're going to be talking about, among other things, the very first Dragonlance novels and game adventures. So, until next time, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I will be back tomorrow night for my other show, Random Encounters, which is improv cartooning. So come on back wherever you're watching this tomorrow evening, 6 p.m. Pacific. And if that doesn't really do it for you, come back next Wednesday. We'll have some fun. So until then, thank you very much. I appreciate you stopping by. See you real soon.